It's a Tuesday night, April 10th, 2018. Danny Lorenzo sends a text message to the man who was about to kill him. 4 words. I'm at the church. He meant it literally, the parking lot of an empty church on Corkscrew Road in Estero, Florida. He and his wife, Deanna, had driven down from Brooksville more than 2 hours to buy some rifles from a seller they'd found online. $3,000 cash. It seemed like a routine gun transaction. Danny was 52 years old. His birthday was the very next day. He never made it. Approximately 18 minutes after that text, 911 calls reported gunfire. They reached the Lee County Sheriff's Office. First responders would find Danny Lorenzo slumped in the cab of his red pickup truck and his wife Deanna beside him. At least 63 shell casings on the asphalt. Danny had been shot 7 times, Deanna 11. The killers were gone, and within months, one of them would be celebrated as a war hero in Ukraine. I'm Steve Rode, and you're listening to True Crime Cases You Haven't Heard. This story is about 2 things that almost never appear in the same sentence. A brutal contract murder in Florida and foreign war. It's about a man who killed 2 people for $3,000, fled to a war zone, and fought his way into the Ukraine national mythology. It's about how a country at war decided this man was a hero worth protecting. And it's about what happened when the United States finally came to collect. There is no good guy in the American legal system angle to this story. There's a brutal double murder. There's a government that made promises it may not have intended to keep. And there's a question that doesn't have a clean answer. When a country is fighting for its survival, does it matter who's pulling the trigger for your side? If you want to go deeper on this one, the case files, and more, it's available exclusively on the Substack. You'll find a link at truecrimeunheard.com. Free subscribers get access. Paid subscribers get the behind the scenes, behind the case podcast and the case documents. Now, let me tell you about Danny and Deanna Lorenzo. Seraphin Danny Lorenzo grew up in a family that believed in service. He joined the military, and he came out of it with a service dog named Red, and whatever invisible weight the VA doesn't always see. He believed in being prepared. If you went to a gun show with Danny Lorenzo, you would watch a man who knew exactly what he was looking at. He'd pick up a rifle and turn it over slowly. He'd check the action, run his thumb along the stock. He kept a notebook. He wrote down serial numbers, calibers, what he paid, and when he bought it. Not because anyone made him, but because that was how Danny worked. Everything in order. Everything accounted for. He had a side business, buying firearms, refurbishing them, reselling them. He also flipped property. But look, he wasn't wealthy, but he was resourceful. The kind of man who always had something going, something he was working on, something he was building. Let's be honest here. He was the kind of man who would show up. If you texted him, he texted back. If you needed a ride, he was there. If someone was in trouble, Danny Lorenzo didn't look away. His wife, Deanna, had her own story that started long before Florida. You see, she grew up on a farm in Woodward, Oklahoma. Flat land, hard work, the kind of upbringing that doesn't leave room for drama. After high school, she joined the Marines, served honorably, came out with the discipline and the directness that military service either gives you or strips away. For Deanna, it gave. She moved to Florida, started working for the Department of Veterans Affairs as a case manager at the Veterans Center in Tampa. Her whole job was to find homeless veterans, people who had fallen through every single crack in the system, and get them help. She held professional certification in veterans healthcare. You see, this wasn't just a job for Deanna, it was a mission. If she saw a homeless vet on the street, she gave them her card. Call me. I will help you. Outside of work, Deanna quilted. She went scuba diving off the shore of Puerto Rico. She took a trip to Italy. She had 2 chihuahuas named Biscuit and Coco, and she called them her kids. Her sister, Angie, described her on camera for ABC News. Deanna dedicated her life to helping fellow veterans, and she married one of them. Danny and Deanna settled into what her sister called the quiet life. Southwest Florida, the kind of place where you can own land, have space, and stay out of the headlines. They had no freaking clue what was coming. Craig Austin Lang grew up in Pitt County, North Carolina. Not that far from me, actually. Rural land outside Greenville in a town called Aden. The kind of place where military service runs in families. And there aren't many other clear paths out. His childhood was not stable. Not at all. According to reporting by IndieWeek, when Lang was 12 years old, his father, Donald, attempted to murder his stepmother in a drunken rage. His father went to prison for it, and Craig spent the next 5 years in foster care. By 16, he was facing assault charges of his own. He eventually pleaded them down to disorderly conduct. He enlisted in the United States Army in 2008 from Aden. He served as an infantryman deploying to Iraq from September 2009 to August 2010 and to Afghanistan from October 2011 to July 2012. And during that last tour in Afghanistan, his Humvee was hit by an improvised explosive device. The blast left him partially deaf in one ear and severed nerves in his brain, leaving him with partial blindness in his left eye. He had continuous headaches and a traumatic brain injury that would follow him for the rest of his life. Oh, and no surprise, he was also diagnosed with PTSD. On July 13, 2013, the day after his son was born, Lang went AWOL from Fort Bliss in El Paso, Texas. He drove to his wife's residence in Harnett County, North Carolina. According to her testimony, he arrived with a gun and threatened to kill her neighbors and family members. A protective order was already issued against him a month earlier, after he had threatened her life. In an interview with Vice, he later said, "Hey, I told my commanders repeatedly I was going to murder her." He was arrested by SWAT at his parents' house in Aden, and he was discharged from the Army in 2014. After the Army, he worked on an oil rig in North Dakota. Lost that job. Had no direction. Had an identity built entirely around being a soldier. And no war to put it in. So, he found one. In 2015, Russia had already annexed Crimea. The Donbass was at war. Volunteer fighters from around the world were flowing into eastern Ukraine to fight alongside Ukrainian forces against Russian-backed separatists. Lang joined them. He was one of the first Americans to go, years before the full-scale invasion would make it a global cause. He embedded with Right Sector, a Ukrainian nationalist paramilitary organization, and he fought in the Donbass region. He built a reputation as a fearless soldier. His commander in the Georgian National Legion would later describe him as a very good soldier who never had any inclination to Nazism or racism. He believed in the cause. He also had a Ukrainian girlfriend, later his wife, and eventually 2 children. He was, by several accounts, genuinely good at the war biz. He was not good at peace. By 2017, the fighting in Donbass had slowed. Lang left Ukraine and he didn't go home. He went looking for another war. He and a young soldier named Alex Zwiefelhofer traveled to Kenya, trying to cross into South Sudan to fight. They were detained near a town called Naras, deported, and sent back to the United States. It was a failure. But it told you something about Craig Lang's operating principle. If there wasn't a war in front of him, he'd go find one. By early 2018, Lang was back in the United States. He was broke. He was restless. And he connected to Zwiefelhofer. Zwiefelhofer was from Bloomer, Wisconsin. He was younger than Lang, but barely into his 20s. He came from a family with deep law enforcement roots. His father, Jared, was chief of police in Bloomer. And the irony of that will come later. Zwiefelhofer had enlisted in the Army in 2015 and gone AWOL the following year at age 19. He tried to join the French Foreign Legion, and he was rejected. Then he made his way to Ukraine and joined Right Sector. And that's where he met Lang. A West Point Combating Terrorism Center publication would later conclude that Zwiefelhofer was likely more attracted by adventure than far-right ideology. He was young and aimless and drawn to the most dangerous thing he could find. By the time Zwiefelhofer reconnected with Lang in early 2018, he was already a fugitive. You see, he'd been deported from Kenya the year before, and FBI agents searched his phone at the Charlotte, North Carolina airport. They found child sexual abuse material. Jeez. He was charged with 5 counts of sexual exploitation of a minor. He had fled Wisconsin while those charges were pending, and he had nowhere legitimate to go. Lang had a plan. He wanted to fight in Venezuela against the Maduro government, which he saw as another front in the same ideological war he'd been fighting in Ukraine, but he was broke and needed money. And Zwiefelhofer, the son of a small-town police chief already on the run, had a very specific search in his internet history that investigators would later recover. He had typed the words, "How to smuggle myself to South America." That's not a phrase someone accidentally casually searches. No, that's someone who already knew he was planning something that would require him to disappear. By April 2018, they had a solution. They would set up a fake gun sale, lure a buyer, kill him, and take the cash. On approximately April 5th, 2018, Lang and Zwiefelhofer checked into a La Quinta Inn near Miami. They had the outline of a plan, and they needed a victim. Zwiefelhofer posted weapons for sale on Arms List. It's a firearms marketplace. He listed approximately 15 firearms, and he priced them to sell. $3,000 takes all. Danny Lorenzo saw the listing and reached out. Remember, he was the veteran. He was a gun refurbisher. 15 rifles for $3,000 was exactly the kind of deal he knew how to evaluate. So he made arrangements to meet the seller. That's all Danny thought he was doing. That's when the planning got specific. Lang and Zwiefelhofer's planning, not Danny's. According to evidence presented at trial, Lang and Zwiefelhofer were not improvising. They changed their proposed meeting location multiple times because they were looking for a specific kind of place. Dark, no cameras, no witnesses. They chose the parking lot of an empty church on Corkscrew Road in Estero, Florida, and they agreed on a time. Danny texted someone before they left, "I have cash on hand. Mine is a sure deal." He and Deanna loaded up the red truck and drove more than 2 hours south from Brooksville. The church parking lot was quiet that night. It was dark, and it was the kind of dark that happens at the edge of a Florida suburb where the streetlights thin out and the surrounding land is undeveloped. Danny and Deanna Lorenzo pulled their red pickup truck into the lot. At 10:37 p.m., Danny sent his confirmation text. And according to investigators, approximately 18 minutes later, the first 911 calls reporting gunfire reached the Lee County Sheriff's Office. What happened next was not a robbery gone wrong. It was flat out an ambush. Local residents who lived near Corkscrew Road later told reporters they heard what one person described as a sudden hail of rapid gunfire. Not a few shots. It was sustained fire, the kind of shooting that happens when people have come prepared to kill efficiently and completely. Federal prosecutors would later describe the weapon used as a machine gun, a fully automatic firearm, a weapon to kill. When it stopped, the red pickup truck was riddled with bullet holes. Investigators recovered at least 63 shell casings from the asphalt. 63! Danny Lorenzo was shot 7 times in the head and lower body. His wife, Deanna, took 11 rounds in the head, the neck, and the abdomen. Both were dead at the scene. The killers took the cash that Danny had brought, the $3,000, and they, whoosh, disappeared. Deanna's sister Angie would later tell ABC News, "She was scared. I know she had to be." And she also said, "I still have my moments and sometimes I just break out and cry." The first investigation was local, the Lee County Sheriff's Office. The murders were brutal. The victims had no known enemies, and within days, it was clear to investigators that whoever had done this wasn't from Florida. The shooting pattern, the specificity of the ambush, the immediate disappearance, this had the signature of trained soldiers. Detective Sarah Rodriguez, one of the investigators who worked the case, would later say, "It's a roller coaster when you want something this badly. We want people to answer for what they've done." A week after the murders, deputies released the victims' names to the public. And that's all they released. They were, as one local reporter put it, staying very tight-lipped. At the time, no one had a theory involving Ukraine. After the murders, Lang and Zwiefelhofer split up. Zwiefelhofer ran, but not far, and not smart. He made it out of Florida and went back to Bloomer, Wisconsin. Brilliant. Back to the town where his father was the chief of police. Lang moved differently. He had an operation to run. Before leaving the Miami area, he and Zwiefelhofer visited a military surplus store. And according to federal investigators, they discussed weaponry for fighting against the Venezuelan government and acknowledged that this involved killing people. They had just killed 2 people for $3,000, and they were already planning the next war. Lang made it back to Ukraine, and he rejoined Right Sector in the Donbass, and he kept fighting. He also started talking. According to court records, in the months after the murders, Lang told at least 3 different people what he had done. Not confessions exactly, but more like boasting, filtered through the kind of bravado that comes from believing you're untouchable. To one person, he said he and his partner had lured, killed, and robbed 2 people several months earlier. The person he told this to didn't believe him. Well, not until Zwiefelhofer later confirmed the story. To a second person, Lang described the murders as a meeting gone wrong. He and his partner tried to hire people to take them out of the country, but the meeting ended in gunfire. He showed this person a news article about the crime. A news article with a photograph of a red truck with crime scene tape. He was showing people proof. He was proud. To a third person, he said he went to Florida, paid a man to take him to another country, and then Lang killed him to get his money back. He showed this person the same newspaper photo, and then he told them that he had unloaded the clips into the truck. He also told this third person that he wanted to fight a war on every continent, and he wanted this person to come with him. And Lang wasn't just bragging, he was recruiting. During this same period, federal investigators would later discover that Lang had been mentoring a young Army soldier at Fort Riley, Kansas, named Jarrett William Smith, coaching him via Facebook towards joining the fighting in Ukraine. Smith was later arrested for distributing bomb-making instructions to undercover FBI agents and discussing attacks on politicians and news networks. The FBI's criminal complaint specifically described Lang's role as mentorship. A wanted double murderer sitting in Ukraine, radicalizing a soldier on a U.S. Army base. Look, let's pause here for a moment, because this is not how killers usually behave after a murder. The psychological literature on this is actually pretty damn clear. Most people who kill, even people who kill without remorse, don't go around bragging about it to other people. That's a specific kind of personality. The forensic term is antisocial, but I think the plain English version is more useful here. This is someone who does not believe that the rules apply to them. Not the legal rules, not the social rules, not the basic human rule that says you don't tell people you killed someone for money. Craig Lang told at least 3 people because he genuinely didn't think it mattered. And he was wrong about that. Those 3 witnesses became 3 of the most powerful pieces of evidence against him. Federal investigators identified Craig Lang and Alex Zwiefelhofer as suspects in the Lorenzo murders. The trail wasn't complicated. They traced the arms list posting to Zwiefelhofer's phone and connected it to Lang. The FBI got involved, and Zwiefelhofer was arrested in the United States. He never made it overseas. Lang was a different problem. He was in Donbass, fighting, building a life, building a reputation. And then in August 2019, Ukraine arrested him. Not because of Florida, but because of something else entirely. He had been detained at the Ukraine-Moldova border checkpoint while trying to get a permit extension. He had told a judge he'd come back to help Ukraine, and he asked to stay so he could marry his Ukrainian girlfriend. And the United States saw its opening. Within weeks of Lang's Ukrainian detention, the U.S. government formally initiated extradition proceedings. A federal grand jury in Florida returned an indictment on December 4th, 2019, and that's when this case became something no one had anticipated. Because Craig Lang, wanted for double murder in Florida, had become a legitimate war hero in Ukraine. This is not propaganda. This is not spin. Right Sector and its affiliated units confirmed that Lang had fought in the Donbass region for years. He had a Ukrainian wife, Ukrainian children. He had bled for Ukraine. He was, in the eyes of many Ukrainians, one of the foreign volunteers who had come when it mattered and stayed. When the United States formally requested his extradition, the response inside Ukraine was fierce. A Ukrainian organization dedicated to protecting Ukrainian POWs filmed the court hearings. Over 900 people watched those recordings in Ukraine. The organization was advocating for Lang to stay. Right Sector supporters appeared at the courthouse, and according to NBC News reporting, they chanted, "Glory to heroes," for a man wanted for double murder in Florida. Yeah, glory to heroes. For a man who killed Danny and Deanna Lorenzo for $3,000. The Ukrainian courts ruled on October 8, 2019, to hold Lang in custody while the extradition request was considered. Lang's legal team immediately appealed to the European Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg. Their argument was straightforward. The United States uses the death penalty. Craig Lang's alleged crimes in Florida could qualify for the death penalty, and the European Convention on human rights, Article 2 protects the right to life. And extraditing Lang to a country that might execute him violated that right. The ECHR took the case seriously. For 4 years, Craig Lang sat in Ukrainian custody. Not a prison exactly, more of a detention status. He was confined to Kiev city limits, where the legal machinery of 2 continents ground slowly through his case. And then something changed everything. On February 24th, 2022, Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine. The world as we knew it changed in February 2022. For Ukraine, it was an existential crisis. For Craig Lang, it was something else. It was a second chance. He contacted Dragon, his old right sector connection, and according to The Intercept's reporting, Lang said, "My country is under attack. I have to do something." Within days, he had rejoined Ukrainian forces fighting in Irpin, one of the hardest-fought suburbs of the capital, where Russian armored columns were pushing towards Kiev. Lang was assigned to a special forces unit with other foreign veterans, and he participated in ambush operations against Russian convoys. Combat footage circulating online showed him in the field with a unit called Task Force Pluto. Contract documents obtained by The Intercept showed that Lang formally signed with the Special Forces of the Marines of the Armed Forces of Ukraine in March 2022. And then in July, he signed a second contract with the International Legion. An FBI agent confirmed in May 2022 that Lang was actively fighting with Ukrainian territorial defense forces against Russian forces. He was again a soldier at war, while his victim's family waited for justice in Florida. Lang told reporters that Ukrainian military leadership knew about his fugitive status. Everybody was aware of it. Nobody cared. Within weeks of the invasion, ABC News released footage they had filmed in Kiev the previous spring. It was a sit-down interview with Craig Lang. The network had held it. Now it was news. In that interview, Lang appeared calm, practiced, comfortable on camera. He speaks about Ukraine's cause with conviction. When the reporter presses him about Florida, he deflects without any apparent anxiety. "I can't discuss any of these things," he says. "Anything about Florida, pretty much anything about my time in the United States in 2018, I can't talk about any of that." When the reporter asks him about the white supremacist connections of Azov Battalion, a Ukrainian volunteer unit he had been associated with, Lang makes a careful argument. He says the media's characterization of far-right extremism in Ukraine militia is overblown. He says he's served with black soldiers. He says ideology doesn't match reality on the ground. And then the reporter reads him a direct quote from the commander of that battalion about leading the white races in a final crusade. And Lang stands up. "Wish y'all a good evening," he says. "I'm going to go ahead and leave." And he walks out. The walkout moment is important, not just as a dramatic detail, but as a window into how Lang saw himself. He was willing to talk about Ukraine. He was willing to rebut the war crimes allegations. He was willing to discuss extradition as a political persecution of veterans. But a direct quote from an actual commander, a quote that exists in the public record, that ends the interview. He had no answer for it, so he got up and left. That's a very specific kind of calculation. It's not innocence. That's just damage control. The Intercept spent 18 months with Lang in Ukraine before his extradition. Their reporting, published in 2023, is one of the most detailed accounts that we have of Lang's thinking in those years. He told reporters things that should have been inadmissible in polite company. He said he'd participated in operations where Russian soldiers were killed at close range. And he described these with the same flat effect someone might use to describe completing a work task. He called himself a professional. Let's put the brakes on for a second. You've just listened as a wanted killer became a celebrated combat veteran. Fight for years in a war zone, sign military contracts with the Ukrainian armed forces, and give a national television interview while a double murder warrant sat on his record. And that's where we are. And here's what's coming. The deal the United States made to get Lang back. What happened in the courtroom when he tried to hold them to it. And what the jury decided. This is the kind of case that doesn't let you settle into a clean narrative. The case files and the Behind the Case podcast, well, all of that is available in my Substack, and you can reach that by subscribing at truecrimeunheard.com. It's free to subscribe. I'll be right back. To get Craig Lang back to the United States, the government had to make promises. Look, let's be honest. This is how international extradition works. You don't just ask a foreign country to hand over a defendant. No, you have to negotiate. You guarantee. You put things in writing. The United States wrote to Ukraine's Prosecutor General's office 2 core assurances. First, the United States would not seek the death penalty. And second, they described what a negotiated outcome might look like. And according to the court record, the U.S. told Ukraine that if Lang entered a plea agreement, the estimated sentencing guideline would range between 292 to 365 months of imprisonment. That's approximately 24 to 30 years. Not life, not consecutive life sentences, 24 to 30 years. Ukraine's Prosecutor General's office said, okay, and accepted those assurances and agreed to extradition in August 2020. No surprise, Lang's team appealed to the European Court of Human Rights, and for 3 more years the case sat in Strasbourg. On November 9th, 2023, the ECHR denied Lang's application. Ukraine had run out of legal avenues to protect him. So in May 2024, nearly 6 years after the murders, Craig Lang was extradited from Ukraine to the United States. He was 34 years old, and he arrived in Florida, where the judge was waiting. He faced charges in 3 separate federal districts: Florida for the murders, North Carolina for passport fraud and identity theft, and in Arizona for passport misuse. But it was the Florida case, the red truck, the parking lot, the 63 shell casings. That's the one that would define everything. The trial of Craig Lang, United States versus Craig Austin Lang, began in September 2025 in the Middle District of Florida, the Fort Myers Division. Before the trial began, something happened that doesn't get told. In June 2025, approximately 3 months before his trial was scheduled to begin, Craig Lang tried to plead guilty. He offered a global plea. He was willing to admit to the murders. In exchange, he wanted to be sentenced within the range that the United States had described to Ukraine. That 292 to 365 month window, 24 to 30 years. The United States rejected that offer. Lang's attorneys filed a motion asking the court to enforce the sentencing assurances that had been made to Ukraine, and the argument was straightforward. The U.S. told Ukraine that this was the deal. The ECHR relied on those assurances when it upheld extradition. And Lang was willing to plead guilty to honor that framework. The U.S. should be bound by what it promised. The judge denied the motion without prejudice, meaning it wasn't foreclosed forever, but it was denied. The court found the motion premature because Lang had not yet been tried or convicted. So the trial proceeded. Alex Zwiefelhofer had already been tried and convicted separately by a jury after a 2-week trial on March 8, 2024. Court documents suggest that during his own proceedings, he upped his role in describing what happened. Neither man tried to minimize their involvement when the record was being made. The government presented the 3 witness statements to which Craig Lang had boasted about the murders. Under federal rules of evidence, statements against interest, the court admitted most of them. The jury heard Lang's own words, recounted by people he trusted with them. The jury heard about the newspaper article he carried, the red truck, the crime scene tape, the detail about unloading the clips. The jury heard about Danny Lorenzo, a veteran with a service dog named Red, who refurbished firearms as a side business and brought $3,000 in cash because he saw a good deal on Arms List. And they heard about Deanna Lorenzo, a Marine who spent her career at the VA helping homeless veterans find their difficult way back, who called her 2 chihuahuas her kids, who quilted and went scuba diving, and who married a man she so deeply loved. On September 15, 2025, the jury convicted Craig Austin Lang on all 6 counts. Craig Lang's sentencing hearing was in December 2025. Zwiefelhofer had already received his sentence months earlier. On August 6, 2024, he got consecutive life sentences plus an additional 23 years to run concurrently. The son of a Bloomer, Wisconsin police chief, 27 years old, sentenced to die in federal prison. He's now at a United States penitentiary in Terre Haute, Indiana, and he was ordered to pay $10,886 in restitution to the victims' families. They're most likely never going to get that. But hey, now it was Lang's turn. The Department of Justice press release states the sentence clearly. Lang received consecutive life sentences, not concurrent, consecutive, one after the other. That's a legal statement that says these sentences won't overlap. He'll serve one life term and then another. No parole, no end date, no possibility of getting out. And he was also ordered to pay $10,886 in restitution to the victims' families. The Justice Department called the conduct shocking in its scope and its callous disregard for human life. Remember, the United States told Ukraine that a negotiated sentence would fall between 24 and 30 years, and the actual sentence was consecutive life. The legal question this raises is genuinely complicated, and I want to be honest about that. Extradition assurances are diplomatic communications, not contractual guarantees to the defendant. Courts have genuinely held that a defendant doesn't have personal standing to enforce promises between governments. But the ECHR, the International Human Rights Court, it relied on those sentencing estimates when it agreed that extraditing Lang to the U.S. would not violate his rights. If the U.S. never intended to be bound by those estimates, well, that's a different moral calculation. And I'm not saying Lang deserved a lighter sentence for killing Danny and Deanna. I'm saying that the question of whether the United States played straight with Ukraine is worth asking, regardless of what you think Lang deserves. Angie Crowder, Deanna's sister, had been waiting for this since the night she couldn't reach her sister by phone, since the moment she got the call. She had waited through the extradition fight, through the ECHR delays, through the years of Lang living openly in Kiev, giving interviews, being celebrated as a soldier, signing military contracts with the Ukrainian armed forces, and all through the trial, through the motion to enforce sentencing assurances, through all of it. She said in 2022 on camera for ABC News, "I want their story told. These were two fun-loving people, and their life was snuffed." She also said, "I would like to see him come back and stand charges." And he came back. He stood charges. And the charges stood. Among the charges both Lang and Zwiefelhofer were convicted on was a violation of the Neutrality Act, a 1794 law that makes it a federal crime for an American citizen to enlist in or furnish material support to a military expedition against a country at peace with the United States. The Venezuela plan, the reason they killed Danny and Deanna, was, in the government's view, exactly that. A law from George Washington's presidency applied to two men who killed a Florida couple to fund a war they never reached. I've thought a lot about what the Craig Lang case means beyond the facts. And I keep coming back to a tension that I don't think resolves cleanly. He killed two people in cold blood for $3,000. That fact is not ambiguous. The evidence is overwhelming. The sentence, consecutive life, well, that reflects the severity of what he did. And I'm not arguing he should have gotten less. But Ukraine celebrated this man, a country fighting for its existence, decided that what Craig Lang did with a rifle in the Donbass mattered more than what he did in Florida. And for years, they were willing to fight the entire international legal apparatus to keep him. They chanted, "Glory to heroes!" at his courthouse hearing. His commanders praised him. He signed military contracts while he was a fugitive, and the state knew, the military knew. Nobody gave a damn. Is that wrong? Maybe. But I also understand it. In a war, you take the soldiers you can get. You decide that the person in front of you willing to bleed for your flag is your problem now, not someone else's court system's problem. The people who got the worst of that calculation were Danny and Deanna Lorenzo. They got caught between a man who thought he was above ordinary consequence, a war that turned him into something that complicated everyone's judgment, and a legal system that took 6 years to bring him to trial. 63 shell casings on a church parking lot in Florida, and a man who thought he'd left that behind in a country far enough away that it wouldn't matter. But it mattered. Let's not forget, Deanna Lorenzo grew up on that farm in Oklahoma. She joined the United States Marines. She moved to Florida and spent her career helping homeless veterans. She gave her card to strangers and she said, "Call me, I will help you." She went scuba diving off the coast of Puerto Rico. She quilted. She had 2 chihuahuas called her kids. She married a fellow veteran named Danny, and he was a man who kept notebooks, who showed up, who texted back, who had a service dog named Red at his side. And he had a side hustle he was proud of. On April 10th, 2018, the night before Danny's 53rd birthday, they drove that red truck to that church parking lot because they were buying firearms from a seller they'd found online. It was a deal Danny knew how to evaluate. It was something that he had done before. They never came home. Red and the kids never saw their parents again. Alex Zwiefelhofer is serving consecutive life sentences at the federal penitentiary in Terre Haute, Indiana. He was 20 years old when he went to that church parking lot on Corkscrew Road, and he will die in federal prison. His father, that police chief of Bloomer, Wisconsin, watched his sentencing on camera. Craig Austin Lang is serving consecutive life sentences in a federal correctional facility. The war in Ukraine that he had fought in, that he believed in, it continues without him. The country he bled for had sent him back when a court finally told them they had no choice. So, this is what I do here. I tell the story. Their names were Serafin Danny Lorenzo and Deanna Lorenzo. They were 2 fun-loving people, and their life was snuffed. Thank you for listening to True Crime Cases You Haven't Heard. I'm still Steve Rode. If this episode moved you, if you want to go deeper, well, if you're one of my paid subscribers on Substack, you get the full case files for the Craig Lang episode, and you get my Behind the Case podcast. That's where I talk about some deeper issues than what I described in this podcast. Things that just didn't fit into this episode. And if you have 2 minutes, please leave a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Look, it's the single most effective thing here listeners can do to help this show reach more people. Reviews tell the platforms this show is worth recommending, and this show is worth recommending. Next time, I'll be back with another case you haven't heard. So until then, I want you to stay curious, stay safe, and stay subscribed.
Yeah.
See ya.
Cases you ain't heard about. Time to dig in. Yeah. Folders full of federal files, court documents stacked for miles. Ain't no famous names in here, just the truth that disappeared. Sworn affidavits, FBI, every claim verified. No speculation, no disguise, just the facts before your eyes. True crime cases, you have heard every single verified word. We honor the people, tell the whole story. No exploitation, just the glory of the truth coming to light. Cases overlooked, we make it right. Victims ain't just plot devices, not just names, not just crisis. Families deserve the dignity, stories told with integrity. 30 years I walked this road, investigations heavy load. From the dispatch desk to the mic, getting every detail right. True crime cases, you have heard every single verified word. We honor the people, tell the whole story. No exploitation, just the glory of the truth coming to light. Cases overlooked, we make it right. And to my listeners, everyone, couldn't do this without you, son. You're the reason that I dig every case, small or big. This community we've made, truth and dignity displayed. Court documents don't lie, and neither do I. True crime